luckily through learning meditation and being in the forest of Sweden, you learn a sense of like quietness, that not every thought is the truth. You don't need to run with it. So I definitely had that thought, yeah, but it definitely wasn't one that dominated or commandeered my whole attention.
Welcome to The Slowdown, your time to define success and growth for yourself with a little inspiration from others. Recorded at London's Brazen Studios, I had a beautiful conversation with Nigerian-British creative entrepreneur Solomon Oyemade. Solly and I have had many deep chats over the course of our long friendship, but this was the first time we recorded them. I loved how his experiences provided a very different viewpoint on this topic. We talk about the need for monastic hideaways as well as ambitious places, the importance of anchors rather than titles, grief as a great equalizer, and the value of thanking our parents. I hope you feel as refreshed and energized as I did after this conversation. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to talk to you. By way of a little introduction, I'll just read a bio that I wrote, sort of a bio. Solomon Oyemade and I met 15 years ago. You were the plug. I think that's not an official job title. Your official job title was location manager, but really to me, you were the plug. We met on set of a music video that Rohan Blair Mangat, the amazing director, was shooting. I was with my friend Maria. We were in a council estate in the middle of the night, and that's how our friendship began. In my due diligence on you, I discovered that you were actually a location manager for 11 years. And at some point, you started to feel uneasy using your creativity to generate sales for massive brands. You said in an interview with University of the Arts London, and I quote, "I always had a problem with the amount of creative brainpower used to make some kid somewhere stress their mum out to buy them the latest pair of trainers." I'm going to get back to that because I just think that one sentence says so much about you in so many different ways. But you then went on to create Ikigai Journal, which transmuted into Curated Funding, an online library that gives creatives and social entrepreneurs access to an archive of active awards, grants, and funding initiatives. I think this is such important work because creative projects just don't get made because of the complex bureaucracy of things like Arts Council funding. So I also want to return to that. Solomon is currently the Special Projects Manager at Shoreditch Arts Club, programming culturally significant events that celebrate diversity and grassroots creativity in their beautiful member space. Solomon is also, and I love speaking things into being like this, working on a project with social wellness, leveraging his diverse experience to build resources and tools to support founders in creating impactful communities. His work reflects a belief in the power of accessible information and human connection to drive meaningful change. Solomon's story is one of curiosity, resilience, and the pursuit of lasting impact. I'm so honored to have you here.
That was a beautiful introduction. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Give me some context on small Solomon. Where did you grow up? How did your family and your upbringing affect your understanding of success and what you should be striving for?
It's a really interesting place to start. So I grew up in Hackney, and not necessarily the Hackney that everyone recognises now, more like the one where roads were called Murder Mile and things like that.
I remember Murder Mile.
Yeah, exactly. I think it still kind of has that name, but it's not really. It's more like Millionaires Row now than Murder Mile. But so my parents moved here in 1982 and 1984 from Nigeria. So it was kind of like a similar story to a lot of, I've heard Skepta describe it really interestingly, like in your house feels like Nigeria and then outside feels like England. So it's like that even the smells and the full sensory experience of being in a Nigerian home with all of the spices and everything we cook with, and also the rules are a little bit different. So you learn to code switch quite quickly. But yes, I grew up in Hackney. It was a really beautiful community-centric place. And about success, I think there was always like a bit of a difference and a bit of a conflict of what success meant to my parents and myself. And I think a big part of, not necessarily the conflict, but the difference was that they worked really hard to come here so that all of me and my brothers could have British passports and a lot more opportunity. So we could see opportunities that they couldn't necessarily see. And I saw a lot of opportunities from, I'm not even sure exactly from what age, I don't know where to pinpoint it, but I saw a lot of people living creative lives and like living lives that were kind of, now I understand the word ikigai. So there's I understand there's like a harmony between doing what you love, doing what you enjoy doing, or doing what you enjoy doing what the world needs, doing what you're good at, and getting paid for it. So I understood. I didn't have the words for it, but I understood that was something that I wanted.
Yeah, you have such a strong intuition, so I can imagine a young little Solomon kind of running around figuring all these things out. What was your like first job? What were your first few jobs? How did you kind of find your way in the work world? That's
again like interesting place to start. So in the work world, to give further context, I was a member of like Newham Youth Parliament as a kid. Super nerd. I used to Newham Youth Parliament was an organisation in Newham that was like a youth parliament that would work closely with the council and Parliament in general and work with our local councillor, where we would represent the rights of young people when they were trying to change anything in the borough. And then we went on to set up other youth councils, and that was all from just being part of the school council, just putting my hand up for stuff. Like I was like, oh, that sounds fun, I'll do that. So I was part of Youth Parliament, and when I was working in Youth Parliament, or not working, but it was like in a local sort of community centre, and we had like meetings, and we got to use the town hall. It was it was a really beautiful experience to be surrounded by a bunch of overachievers and really interesting people from different schools. I think in that space I met a woman called Denise who ran a thing called Mouth That Roars, which was a programme where we went into local council estates in the area of Hackney, and we would go to young people during the summer and during like out of term time and ask them if they wanted to learn how to make a film in a week. That was when I was about 14. I would go into different areas in different council estates and speak to young people and ask them if they wanted to learn how to edit, pre-produce. And then we teach them how to use camera equipment and make a film about any subject they wanted. And then at the end of the week, they would invite all of their friends and family to watch the film that they made. So that experience was like my first little bit of work, because I was getting paid as a facilitator, like teaching young people how to use film.
Right. It's interesting. I went to an Islington school, and Islington at the time, this is why I laugh with you, was an underdeveloped borough.
Yeah.
And I went to an state all-girls school, and we had a lot of these programs that were, in hindsight, really quite amazing. Part of a gifted and talented program. And I remember making music in like University of Holloway. I remember learning about journalism, being taken to broadcasting houses, and it was really like quite amazing, some of the stuff that were available to young Londoners.
For sure. And I think there was a lot of initiatives for young Londoners. They lasted for years, and loads of people benefited from it. I met some amazing people, some of them that even like work for the UN now, and they really like took it all the way through. I think the peak of that working for Denise was when I got to go to Geneva and film the UN conventions on the rights of a child. So I was in the conventions that the UK sign, saying that this is the basic rights of young people and that they have to uphold. So we got to film like the evaluation to see how well we're doing as a country. And that, it was super interesting. And that kind of led to my love of film, I think.
Wow. And then through your love of film, how did you become a location manager? Was that something that you applied for, knew was a job that existed?
It's really interesting because I met a location manager, and I struggled to find his name, but I remember commandeering him at a party at a friend's birthday. And I think I was maybe just about like 19, and he told me he was a location manager, and I had so many follow-up questions that I eventually just like ended up speaking to him the whole time, and I could see that his eyes were kind of darting a bit to the exit. But he was like, eventually I gave him that, now I know it as like the joy of speaking and the joy of like expressing his journey. And he did like teach me a lot about what that role entailed and how I would go about finding it, until eventually he was like, look, here's my number, and if you get stuck, just let me know. So I was kind of on the lookout for those sort of roles. And then I met someone, actually someone posted it on Facebook, that they were looking for help to clear out a big empty warehouse in East London in Scrutton Street. And it went on to be called Scrutton Street Studios, but it was just a big empty warehouse that had squatters in for a long time. And he just needed help to clear it and like paint. So I just responded. And when I went to go and see him, he was just telling me about his plans for this like 33,000 square foot. I mean, it's hard to even get your mind around that, the sheer size of it. But it went on to be the Curtin Hotel.
Okay.
So that building, we lived in that building, and I was the location manager. in that building. So my job was to rent the place out for photo shoots, music videos, exhibitions, and things like that. So I was a location manager, but in one building. And then when we were getting double booked, I started putting them in other places. So then I started to cultivate the skill of, I guess, being resourceful on other people's behalf.
I have to return, as I promised, to the quote, which I love so much. I'm going to read it again. I always had a problem with the amount of creative brainpower used to make some kid somewhere stress their mum out to buy the latest pair of trainers. Tell me about this.
I guess I've always been the person that has been looking for opportunities to add more value and like to upskill a bit and work out where I fit in the world. I think that's just the journey. But I remember just having that insight while on set, working on I'm not really going to say the brand, but working on a campaign. And I remember just like being surrounded by this amazing, almost like pirate crew of talent and brain power. And I was just thinking that, like, if we got together and wanted to do something else, we could easily do something else. But we're all kind of we've come together, like drawing our skills together, which was beautiful. But I just felt that it was for the purpose of trying to increase the market share of a brand. And then I thought market share, and I was like, okay, well, that's what we're doing. But then I started thinking about what is most of my time going towards. And I generally just remember, like, even me as being susceptible to wanting new things and stressing my mum out to buy things because I saw an advert for something. And I was just like, I didn't really want to contribute to that in that same way. I thought there's better things I could be doing with my time. And I felt the same for other people. I was like, well, anyone can do what you want with your time. But I was like, if there's an opportunity to add more value and maybe reframe what your contribution is to the planet in a way. So that's how I felt.
In the interview, you then go on to explain some years of soul searching. What did you do in those following years?
What did I do? I can remember what I did, but it's like, it felt like I was falling through it. I wrote down on pieces of paper 10 different places that I thought I might want to live at some point, that I just had an opinion about, and it included like Costa Rica, Portugal, some wild cards like Ghana, that I heard some amazing things about. I mean, Ghana's not a wild card now, but like back then, I didn't know anyone that had just moved to Ghana. So I bought a one-way ticket to Stockholm because I picked one out of the 10 and it just was Sweden. And I was like, okay, it's cold, but let's go. And I don't know anyone there.
Well, how did you not have any fear around doing? Was it just from the experience you'd had of the last 10 years of being like a networker, like you knew everybody, you just felt, I'm going to show up here and I'm just going to make friends and things are going to be fine?
I did. It was that. And also I went to a few different schools when I was growing up. So the whole, do you mind if I sit here? Like is my, like I can do that. I'm quite comfortable with the discomfort of not knowing someone and saying, do you mind if I sit here? And then sparking up a conversation with a stranger. So I thought that might work. And I also thought I had enough money for 3 months, which turns out in Stockholm is about enough money for 6 weeks. So I get a one-way ticket to Sweden, and then I would progressively have less and less money. And I think that where I was staying first was like a place called like the Generator Hostel in the center of town. Then I'm having like a little bit less money, so I'm moving a little bit further and further out. Then I move out and it's like, that's too far. So I come back in again. But when I come back in, I meet someone that had just done a thing called a workaway. And I'd never even heard of a workaway, and I never even knew what that was. But it's basically this website where in over 160 countries, there are different projects that you can, you get free accommodation and free food, and you can support those projects. Sometimes that's doing carpentry, sometimes that's farming, sometimes it's taking care of animals. And I had no idea what I was going to be doing, but I just thought this shakes things up from that thought of making a kid stress their mum out. And then this was the response to the pendulum swinging the other way. So I met someone that told me about Workaway. And then in one evening, I just applied to as many as possible. And I found one that was an African drum school in a 300-person intentional rural village in Uddebo, which I just thought, why not?
Which is where? In
Uddebo, which is in Sweden, just outside of Gothenburg.
Wow.
Yeah. So then I got there and I got there. I basically just booked a train. And then when I arrived, they showed me around the village, and they told me the story of the village, that it used to be an old textile village. The textile factory shut down, so most of the people moved out. And then they had a fermentation festival in this village. This was like 4 years prior to me getting there. And they had a fermentation festival. So everyone that came to this kombucha, sort of tempeh, very bohemian sort of vibe, came to this festival, they looked around the village and they saw these empty houses. And they're like, what's going on with these empty houses? And then it transpired that they had, the whole village had been depopulated. And that happens quite a lot in a lot of rural villages. So some of the people who went to this festival started like telling their friends about this village, and they were buying houses for like €5,000. Then it went up to like maybe 10 and 15. And I ended up in this village 4 years into its inception. And I ended up volunteering with a wonderful guy called Fabian, who was an African djembe teacher. No, he was Swedish, but he learnt djembe from traveling himself. And he bought the old schoolhouse and turned it into an African drum school.
Wow.
Yeah, wild.
What were how long did you spend there doing that?
I think about like 9 to 10 months.
Wow.
I didn't intend on spending 9 to 10 months.
No,
there.
and that is a long time
It's
as a young
really long
person.
time.
What were the 3 things you learnt from Flavio?
I'd say from Fabian, it was Fabian and all of the people in this village that had repopulated it, and it's like, I think they call it like an intentional community. I think one of the things I learned was how little I needed my phone. My phone was plugged in by where my shoes were, like where you take your shoes off before you go in. My plug was just there. I treated it like post. I would go and check my phone and be like, oh, okay, that's what I've got to respond to today. Then I'd put it down. Then I'd go about my day. What did I learn? I learned bits of traditional Swedish carpentry because they were just showing. They were very smart because the Swedish people that lived in this village, they were all well travelled. So a lot of them had been volunteers in other countries before. So they knew that they could help develop this community with the help of volunteers, and it would give them like a interconnectivity and not just like this remote
with the outside world. Yeah.
Exactly. So there were volunteers from all around the world that I met. So when I first got there, learning traditional Swedish carpentry, first thing I learned. Second thing I learned after how little I needed my phone. And the third thing I learned was how much I love to cook. So we all had a rota for contributing in the kitchen and cooking for all of the rest of the volunteers. And one of the things we cooked all the time was like a variation of brown rice, salad, and a type of curry. And when I was in the kitchen, I was like, I kind of want to cook something a bit different. So I would call my friends, because it was a way for me to connect with my friends as well, put them on FaceTime, be like, what was that dish that you cooked? And they were like, oh, it was a sweet potato and Swede gratin. And I was like, okay, done. That's what I'm doing. So then I'm making gratin, I'm making like pumpkin ravioli. I'm going to like local hunters and farmers in the area that had bought like wild boar, and then I'm like making like wild boar ragu. And so they were like, you clearly love the kitchen. Do you want to just take over the kitchen? The most important and resonant thing I learned from that was really about that in certain places and certain contexts, like enthusiasm is pretty much the only qualification you need. And then the proof is in the effort and the love that you've put into the thing. And I think in London, it started to get a little bit more credentialed. Like as in, if you can't prove that you are worthy of this opportunity, then you won't have that opportunity, without realizing some of these opportunities go to the person that's the most enthusiastic and most proactive.
It's so interesting. And these are all beautiful things that you learn. But I feel like our culture, at least the Western, maybe London one, is that they seem almost more like they would be described as like soft skills. When you came back to London after all of that, and I assume you met up with your friends who are climbing career ladders and doing certain things and are like, oh, by a certain age, you should have done X, Y, Z in this world as a man. Did you feel any like pressure or stress about any of that stuff? I
didn't have the words for this thing again, but I learned it later in life, which is like comparison is a thief of joy. And I think genuinely I would try my best to investigate the comparison, because it's like you don't necessarily have context to whatever anyone's going through at any given time and their journey. And it removes gratitude as well, because you're not necessarily grateful for where you are. And I think, leaning into the things that you find really easy and the things that you are really good at means that you are going to have a peculiar path. There's not going to be a straight line, because you don't even know what you don't know. And you're going to work that out as part of your journey and that commitment to it. So I think I did come back, and I wasn't completely immune to feeling like slightly behind in a way, but I think that helped me come out of that mindset, because that was just like a pervasive limiting thought. Luckily, through learning meditation and being in the forests of Sweden, you learn a sense of like quietness, that not every thought is the truth, so you don't need to run with it. So I definitely had that thought, but it definitely wasn't one that dominated or commandeered my whole attention.
At that age, I was comparing myself to others, trying to follow this super masculine capitalist idea of success. So that's why I'm delighted to be talking to you. Your journey was also then shaped by, is it 2.5 years of travel that you went on to do with your then partner, living as a house sitter and volunteering in, and I want to get all the locations correct, Costa Rica, California, Mexico, Portugal, and Barcelona. Why did you decide to do that at that point in your life? So
I think having a partner that was supportive of a peculiar path, because I think I wear it, it's not a thing that I hide, that I am up for trying new things and going to new places. For context, I think it was just before lockdown. My then partner and I had gone on holiday to Cork, and we were reined in, as it does in Ireland quite often. And we were sitting in a hotel and we were just describing like the idealized version of our lives and what that would look like. I knew that I wanted to get into tech, and I knew that technology was going to be a way for me to build wealth and also to build impact. Like I'd be able to have more of a positive impact on people, leveraging technology. And it was a thing that I would do when I was distracted from other things, would just be like reading up on what people were building and working out the skills of like design, development and marketing. So I knew that I was going to have to break the cadence of like rent and the pattern of you needing to have it worked out. So when we discovered house sitting, that felt like a natural fit, and it was an incredible, like life-affirming experience. But it was somewhat monastic. I think people don't necessarily realize that when you're going to a place and you don't know anyone there, there's no birthdays to go to, there's no book launches, there's no keeping up appearances with people, because it's just you and your partner, or some people do it by themselves, and the dog or cat or guinea pig that you're looking after, and the mansion in the jungle that you're living in. So it's not, you don't know anyone. So if you have a project to work on, it's perfect for that.
Right. And again, I feel like I want to ask your learnings from that. But are there any key anecdotes that really come to you as key memories of crazy things that happened? Or was it not very crazy? It was much more monastic.
Well, there's one time in Mexico that I absolutely loved, this place called La Paz, which literally means the peace. It's the place where Mexicans go on holiday, so it's not very touristy, and the place where marine biologists go to study whales giving birth. It is a very serene place to be. And we were looking after two huge French bull mastiffs called Toro and Pi. These beautiful dogs, very slobbery, but terrifying looking, but really soft if you knew them. But you knew them just about when you're taking them for a walk, but no one else really did. So you'd see people cross the road whenever you're walking with these two huge dogs. And I just have the memory of me and my then partner being pulled in different directions by those dogs. And I'm quite a big guy, but it was just like such a joyous like experience living in La Paz and having the pattern of like walking these dogs every single day, and like that ritual and who you'd meet on the way. And it was one of those places where it's so cheap to live that a lot of your ambitions sometimes are formed by where you're living, and they're not necessarily true to you. They're just true to, like, of course, if you live in this place, this is who you'd be. But understanding who you are in a place where there's no pressure on you to tell me how cool this thing that you're currently working on is, or whether you've just won an award, or no one really cares. They're just like, how do you connect? Like, how do you make a person feel? And I think that was more of my strength than accolades, so that felt like this was a perfect setup to meet people and build on like what comes easy to me, which is making new friends.
Yeah, you could just show up, be present, be yourself without any unnecessary materialistic context of who you are.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the ambition that exists outside of an ambitious place, the one that's still there, it starts to dim, but it also gets to a point where there's like a sense of clarity, where you're thinking more about, oh, okay, I have this many years on the planet. How do I use what I know and who I am to contribute something positive and something that resonates with you deeply? Like what pervasive limiting beliefs and myths are you rallying against? And are you using all of the tools, all the experience, all of the resources and gifts that you've been given, like how are you using that to serve others? And that became like very clear without all of the social engagements and without all of the London.
Yeah. I love this idea of ambitious places. Are there other cities beyond London that come to mind? Because to me, New York is the kind of ultimate definition of an ambitious place. And I find the energy of New York quite stressful. Even when I was young and I went there to model, it still felt like you're always missing out on something. There's so much going on. If you are in tech and trying to get funding and you have a clear mission, it's a very productive, I don't know anywhere more productive that you can get things done. But when you're a bit unsure and still figuring things out, it's a very stressful, and, you know, everyone would always ask me, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? And that started to get very like difficult for me.
Yeah. No, I can definitely see that with ambitious places. And New York, I've heard of people that still have Blackberries now because they can't put the Blackberry down long enough to get another phone.
Right.
So they have to still have their Blackberry now. And I think there are places where there is this like hustle in the air and this like whisper of like, you could do better, you could be more, right. You never need more, never enough. And that sort of scarcity. I think changing your location is useful, but I never really wanted to do nothing. You know, like, and that's not something that I feel excited about. Like, I still feel excited about having a project or like scheming with a bunch of friends and like working out how you're going to use your skill sets and your tools and your resources to make something with your time here. So I do love that. I found that the pressure being like released by being in a place like that was amazing because it gives you perspective. But then I still wanted that level of ambition. And I think there's a very simple thing that happened when I was in Sweden that made me realize about this ambition and this like London hustle being useful, and the limits of it was when, so obviously I told you I was cooking every day for volunteers because they were like, do you want to run the kitchen? And then I realized that I was speaking to other people from the village and making friends, but a lot of the volunteers were just spending time with other volunteers and they weren't really meeting anyone else. So I was like, oh, there must be a way to kind of bridge that gap and pull people together. So every Friday, we decided that we were going to do a supper club and invite people from the village to come down, and there'd be music, and it would be very much like a community project, which is super exciting because in the past I'd actually done a supper club called Whiskey and Blues in the Ace Hotel.
I think I remember Whiskey and Blues.
It was quite fun. It was like 100 people, deep South cuisine. James Messiah was DJing, and yeah, it was super fun. So it was just kind of polishing off that old skill set of like gathering people together and placemaking. So the London part of my brain was just like, okay, cool. Well, this is how much I'm going to spend on it. This is how much it's going to cost for people to come. And then as soon as I talked about money with Fabian and some of the other people that were also helping, and they're like, yeah, we don't really do it that way. It's going to have to be donation based. And I was like, donation? That's not going to work. I was like, everyone's going to eat for free. I'm just going to have to fund this thing. I was like, I'm not a philanthropist. This doesn't work.
Because you're thinking in London.
I'm thinking in London.
People just aren't going to pay you anything.
They're not going to pay anything. Yeah, right? So I think there are edge cases where it does work. But I was like, well, this is an idea that I really want to put an effort in. So I need the monetary element of like knowing when I've broken even, knowing that I can cover costs, knowing that maybe it can even make money. How much food do I buy? How much food do I buy? So I was like, this is the mechanics of it. Like, this is how it works. I can't believe like you want me to do this on donation. But I was like, okay, cool. You know these people. So I was like, look, worst case scenario, it's going to cost me this much. We'll just do it once. Every time I spent, first one, I think I spent about £200, maybe 250. Through donations, made about like 750. And I was like, well, this is anomalous. It's the first one. Did it again, same thing happened. Did it again, same thing happened. I was like, well, I'm going to spend more money on it and see what happens. Just like to test it and turn this 3-course thing into 4 courses or 5 courses. And then it turned into 3 times as much every single time. And I know there were some people who didn't pay and some people that did, but in a closed, smaller community like that, the mindset of like scarcity and the mindset of like this London, you've got to be something you've got to garner and command respect for who you are if you want to be respected. So you have to make something of yourself in order to do that. Whereas there, it was like, you just have to be of service. Just have to be useful. Do something useful and you'll be rewarded for it. So it completely changed my mindset when I came back to London, where I was like, it doesn't have to always be about the money of it. It can be about the giving.
Do you think that's a cultural thing where in that community they understood that? Like, do you think you could do a supper club in London that was pay what you think is right and that you would...
Let's do one.
Right.
I'm up for doing an experiment. I'm definitely up for trying that out and seeing how it worked. And I think that was the thing when I came back. I wanted to conduct more experiments. I was less about like, oh, this is what's going to happen from this series of activities. And
here's the outcome.
Here's the outcome. So I was less, I was more of a like scientific about it. Like I have my aims, this is my procedure, findings, conclusions, criticisms, and then doing it again. So it meant that I could build, measure, learn, and I could get into that mindset free from the pressures of the impression that other people would have of the thing that I built.
It's really hard to separate yourself from that, from other people's expectation. At what point did you learn about the concept of Ikigai, which we mentioned at the beginning, and how did it lead into Ikigai Journal, which was your newsletter sharing funding opportunities for creatives and social impact?
That was in Sweden. Being in that space, it meant I could read more, I could have more conversations. There was less demands on my day. I also wasn't paying rent, so there was that, and I was earning money from doing these supper clubs. And it meant that through those conversations, someone had mentioned Ikigai, and it just really resonated with me. And I remembered that one of the problems that people faced when I was showing people around locations, like as a location manager, it wasn't necessarily the quality or caliber of the idea that would determine whether they would get to execute their idea. Some of it would just be in this like developmental sort of purgatory. Even though they've got an amazing team, it was just that they couldn't get the funding. So I knew that funding was like a big barrier for a lot of people. We'd have conversations on set while we're showing people around spaces, and I'm following up being like, how's this project going? They're like, we're still looking for funding. And I was like, oh, this project was funded. So I'll introduce you to this person because they had funding. That's why they executed. And you seem like you're doing a similar project. So I would put those two people together, and then they would almost like mentor this person through the funding cycle. And I did that. And I think there's a lot to be said for focusing on ideas that are based on things you naturally do anyway. Like the plug, like I said, and connecting people to a particular end because there's a common and pervasive pain point. So that pain point was funding. So when I was in Sweden, there was like Ikigai as a phrase, the funding sort of like library or like a map, I was thinking, or like some newsletter or some sort of media thing about telling people about funding and almost like editorializing that data. So that's kind of where it came from, being in that quietness, like the things you only notice when you slow down sort of thing, yeah?
You've mentioned a few times this idea of, I know now in hindsight what that's formally called, but at the time you were just intuiting and figuring it out and noticing things. Now, as you go into your next junction in your career, when you look back, do you see a through line of all of the disparate things that you've done?
I see the utility of like kind of cleaning up the story for like your bio. But I also see those like random things that I did like in 2007 that I threw a party in 93 Feet East with one of my best friends, and then running a venue like the Victorian Vaults where we got like the lease to this building and we just started throwing parties there. And all of those different narratives that they don't necessarily make as much sense if you take them as individual things. Like what are you in a sense? So you're forced to kind of comply with when someone says, what do you do? That's when you have to like narrow the field a bit rather than say, oh, I'm just an explorer or entrepreneur of like randomness.
I used to say to that question, what do you do? I would say, about what?
Yeah, I like that.
Because it provides a gap for the other person to question what they've just asked. But if you did have to summarize, is there a word you use? You say explorer? I say storyteller.
Storyteller. Yeah, no, I love that because you use storyteller, because I remember you were exploring comic books and you were doing a lot of different things, and even female narratives. There's this through line of storytelling with all of the things that you do, and even this permutation of it just feels so natural. So I guess it is definitely good to have a point at which you can find your own center and an anchor that everything comes from. But I had a very interesting conversation with my best friend Jamie Sweeney, where we constantly like reflect each other, like where we're at, and we're like boosting each other up. And that thing of like, can I sit here? Do you mind if I sit here? And that opener, like the person that goes first, like I'm more than happy to be like experimenting with different narratives and different fields and trying to find ways to provide value. So I think ultimately, like, it's picking a pervasive myth that I want to like kind of go at And currently the one is like self-made is a myth. That's the one that I'm really going for. So, because I can see that the lack of collaboration stops people from achieving their goals. And I can see that there's this myth that everyone that you see achieving something is like self-made.
Right.
So that's, I
Kylie
think,
Jenner, the self-made
billionaire, right? And I mean, there's even, I don't normally wade in on Instagram about things, but someone was talking about from DJ to angel investor, and they're like a fourth generation billionaire. Like their parents, their great grandparents were billionaires. So when you're trying to be like the first generation of wealth in your family, and you're trying to like self-navigate, it's like attacking a myth for me feels like an anchor. Like that feels like a way for me to center the narrative around all of the things that I've done. And I think in each thing that I've done, there's like a new perspective gained, and there's also a new tool, and there's also new relationships. And I think those perspectives, tools, and relationships that like summarize the gains from even failed projects and like from the carcass of old dreams, like that's what can be salvaged and then used for other people. So I think in those narratives, I can tell you what I did and what I learned. And I think that's more important to me than necessarily summating it as like, I'm a creative entrepreneur or I'm a creative technologist. Like I'll play with any of those titles whenever I need them for whatever they serve. But I know that one of them that I use at the moment is the founder. And I only use that to, my Instagram, Solomon the founder. And it's only because it reminds me that I need to be starting something. I need to be building something, because that's what I do best.
I love that.
Yeah.
I think it's nice to be freed of these things, because our society has very much become one where our value is placed on our jobs. And job titles, as you mentioned, have become our Instagram bios and our LinkedIn bios and Twitter bios. And it is limiting. We're playing in an infinite game. Yeah. We're not and job titles are finite titles, because if you say, I am a synchronized swimmer, and then you hurt yourself and you can't do that anymore.
What are you then?
What are you?
Yeah.
And so I love the idea of being able to put on different hats and say, well, in this situation, I'm this, and in that, I'm that. And just having something like the founder as the reminder that you should always be starting something. I love that.
And I think I like the playing with being an artist as well. Like, it's not something that I've fully embraced. I mean, I DJ, I've worked in film, I've done a lot of different things, and I plan to do a lot more. And an artist seems like, oh, that's fun. Like I get to play with that. And I think playing with these titles, but also with a nod to the people that went before you that had that title, it's where that's just almost like a signpost of who you can go and learn from. So I think it's useful in that respect, like having a title that allows you to contextualize your lessons for the people that come next. So if like you're an artist and like someone sees your work, then they can say, okay, now I'm going to go and learn the ways of this artist and how they navigated things and their mediums and the ways in which they presented themselves to the world. So I do appreciate titles to an extent, but I think they're quite fun to play with. Yeah.
Speaking of that, is there someone whose life, career, way of being is something you're inspired by and see as a guiding light?
Oof, that's a hard one. My mind keeps leaning to like Fela Kuti, African, like Nigerian folk hero, musician, wonderfully talented man. And like, obviously, like we all contain multitudes, and he did as well. But as an artist, the space that he operated in, like building his world and like building, he had a thing called The Shrine, which was in Lagos, which I've been to. And it felt like I was getting some like revolutionary blood transfusion while I was in there. Because when I came back, I was like, right, that's it. I'm world building. That's what I'm doing. And I gave myself permission to do that through Fela. So seeing the way that he world built and created space to just do what he did, and then encourage other people around him to do what they were good at and what they were exploring as well. I think there's something beautiful in that.
Yeah, providing a space for other people to have permission to be themselves
100%.
is such a beautiful legacy and an amazing thing to do for other people. I think in my own redefinition of success and in sort of slowing down, I definitely realized when I really thought about it, you know, what is success to me? And it's that moment when if I've mentored somebody and 3 years later they text me and say that conversation we had really meant something to me or changed the course of my life. And things like that are so much more important than awards and accolades to me personally. We've kind of mentioned a few times that the career and the job aspect is only obviously one part of the person. But I think partly due to social media, partly due to our obsession with work, I think people judge others and place a lot of value or less value onto that person based on what they do and what they have done. And they forget that work is only one small part of a person's life and priorities. And because I know you and how much importance you place on your family and caring for that family, I was wondering if you could share anything around the priority that you place on family and why.
Well, it's really interesting you asked me today, because today is actually the anniversary of my younger brother's passing. And grief is a thing, it's a great equalizer. And it's just love persisting beyond physical space, like it's just someone's not there and there's no one to go and call or speak to. Like Jonathan, my younger brother, I always say his name. And if you ask me how many brothers I have, I always say 4.
Yep.
Even though one's in spirit and 3 are here, thankfully. I think family to me, especially as I'm grieving and not to compound it again, but my dad just on Sunday had a stroke, and he's a strong African man. It's really difficult to see him in that space, but he's also treating it with a sense of levity at the moment, which is like good and bad. But it's, again, beautiful to see that resilience. And you can see how we like pour into each other. And I think even Jonathan passing, who he had a thing called MPS, which is a genetic disorder that affects you from birth. It's a very rare one and it's deteriorative, but like not many people live past like 10 with it. And it's been like a 10-year anniversary today. And he lived till 24. So he just kept fighting. And I think it taught like all of the things that my brothers, Benjamin, Jonathan, Ezekiel, Big Ben and Little Ben, got 2 brothers called Ben. So the thing that they've all poured into us are like almost those life lessons and the things that you need in order to survive. I know I would not be who I am without them, and the space that they give me and the encouragement and enthusiasm they have for hearing like another one of my ideas or another thing that I'm going to do now. And they, and my mum and my dad for his strength and my mum for her strength, which like, it's funny because if you see my mum and dad now, they don't look like they're even similar age, because my mum is just like really takes care of herself. She buys like 365 cod liver oil tablets at the beginning of the year, and then that's her daily thing. So I think through examples and through seeing people as their imperfect self make the gentle progress that they make through their life is, I don't know, like the best book, film, like you're sharing a life, it's not just yours. It's not just you're just living your life. You're sharing it with these people that are permanent fixtures, or there's mortality. That's the impermanent thing, but the love will be permanent. Yes. And the love is permanent. And I think that permanence gives me balance. And it's the thing that I can draw upon when I'm saying, do you mind if I sit here? That will allow me to know that if you say no, that I'll survive that. And if you say yes...
I have all these brothers.
I have all these brothers, yeah, exactly. And if you say yes, then it's like I can show you the same love that I've been shown. And that will be the basis of our relationship.
This idea that you can have both the example of your family and your parents, and as you said, the gentle way with which they move through the world, and this knowing that watching people over such a long period of time and seeing, change is possible, this is possible, but then also having a safe place for your ideas and being able to showcase stuff and having it be listened to by people who really care about you.
And I kind of want to talk about the fact that it's gratitude is the lens that I'm looking at it through, not perfection. Like me and my mum go at it, me and my dad go at it. We had a lot of conflict through when I was growing up, and conflicting ideas about how to live a fulfilling life and what was important. And they still have things that they expect from me, but that's okay. I've just learned how to carry them with gratitude, that the fact that they expect these things of me is their love. Like they want the best for me from their perspective.
What language do you use to respond to some of the stuff that my parents on a daily basis, it's like, so when are you having a kid?
Same.
What do you say?
Well, they can push your buttons because they installed them. I think we've heard that phrase, right? It's that thing of remembering the lens in which they're speaking to you through. And in Nigeria, we have like an implicit respect for our elders that's that borders on pathological. But like, no matter who they are, that and what they...
You're like, yes, auntie.
Yes, auntie, yes, uncle. I mean, even my friends know to call my mum auntie and my dad uncle. It's like, it's just a given. It's an African parent thing. But I think, to answer your question, like, how do you respond to that? It's knowing that when you were dumb enough to run into traffic and you would just poop yourself, that they were there through all of it, like through all of the good, the bad, the ugly, no matter what was happening in the world. Like, my dad came here when it was like no blacks, no dogs, no Irish. Like, and he was trying to find a job as an accountant, and he worked in both KFC and McDonald's at the same time. I have infinite respect for this man and love and affection, but we are different people and we see the world differently. But that doesn't mean that the way that growing up now, that I've learned that the way I see the world is just as important, because he provided me the almost stepping stones that allowed me to see a bit further. And I think
we stand on the shoulders.
We stand on the shoulders. So it's okay if they're like saying go left and you're like, oh, I can see further. And I don't necessarily need to explain to you in its entire, I don't expect you to understand fully, because you've given me a view that you don't have. So your advice is autobiographical and it's coming from your viewpoint, and it's not lesser than mine, but by its very nature of being like another part of like this tapestry of your heritage and your DNA and how far you've gone back. Like, it's just a slightly like removed tapestry from now. Like, this is my responsibility to manage this part of the tapestry and what it looks like, and then pass those lessons on.
So it's almost like the response is always just thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for your guidance and advice. I'll think about it.
It reminds me of, I had a similar thing with my mum where I always wanted to, I've seen now, above the precipice of what I think the world is like. And I wanted to take her with me. I wanted her to have these transformational experiences. I went to Burning Man and I came back and I said, it's transformational. You have to come. I sent her the longest email. I said, we'll go next year. We'll do all this stuff together. And she said, dear Tiana, thank you for your offer of transformation, but I'm good. I'm 65 and I'm okay. But thanks. And I kept coming up against this wall of her not really being receptive to things that I found mind-blowing and really special. And that just kept creating friction until eventually I did a really beautiful meditation journey in Topanga over New Year's with one of my best friends. And the thing that came to me was, I don't need to change my mum. I need to change my mum in me, because there is 50% of me is my mum already. So it's not the external woman that I need to change. It's the part of me that is her can grow.
Yeah, I think that's like also that thing of understanding the limits of other people's perspectives. And that's okay. Like, it's not meant to be governing. And for them, I guess it's like difficult to relinquish the power that they've had. Because my dad used to say a thing to me that he said some beautiful things to me, but this was one that was like, it's haunted me, but then I found a way to reframe it. And it was like, I've been like you, you've never been like me. And that was like the thing that I was like, oh, but so that means forever that I'd never have value because I've never been exactly the same as you are. But then I realized that it just means that he was like rallying against me rejecting the utility of what he's saying and what his opinion is. And so he's like, use me, like put me in the game, coach. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I'm just like, you don't need to just completely throw out as you're building yourself, like all of the lessons and all of the guidance of these people that you have sometimes problematic relationships with, but these people that just like built the playing ground that you're playing on, essentially. And they've allowed you to get to this point where now you can then self-define and build yourself, you know? I just want to repeat one thing that my mum says to me as well that I love. It's like, if you want something you never had, you have to do something you've never done. And that is like, that's there. Like, that's in there. Deep. Like, so that's all of the, almost like similar to the Ikigai thing, that's all the governance I need, like, essentially. So all of the rest of it, like all of the approval, it's like people will work out. The people will approve of it later.
Yeah.
Like they'll see what you've done and you're like, this is what I meant. And it's sometimes you have to show people instead of telling them.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I feel about the journey and the slowing down of things.
I think a version of that quote is stupidity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results.
Yeah, exactly.
And we can only have new ideas from new vantage points.
For sure.
I think we've talked a lot about journeys and following your true path, but on a personal micro level, how do you slow down in your day-to-day? If you're being pulled in multiple directions, what are the tools that you use to slow down?
Meditation has been like really, really powerful.
What kind of meditation do you do?
So I now just use a timer. I just set a timer, I sit there and I play about with traction and distraction, which is like the story of my life, essentially. So as in, like, this is what I said I was going to do. This is my intention, and this is my attention, and this is how it's waning, and then guiding it back kindly as you would a child. So you're basically, the metaphor in it is that you're exercising the ability to guide yourself back kindly, because that's the very nature of your mind. There's always going to be spitting up suggestions, even though you've set a path and you've set an intention, and then your attention is just like being wavered. And for whatever reason, whether it's, a lot of tech companies, the buck can stop with them for how hacked our attention is. But I think meditation helps me with dealing with what my priorities are on any given day. That, and I've probably been using AI a bit too much at the moment to speak to it and give it like, here's what, like dumping, and then reprioritizing that, and almost like it's pitching me what I think it should prioritize. So that's been fun, playing with like nascent and emergent technology to do that as well. But yeah, I think ancient meditation and then modern would be like using technology to clear the deck.
And it sounds like you have had a pretty good relationship to the word success and a pretty good way at following your intuition to what that leads. But what is your working definition of success now?
So if I've executed an experiment successfully and I've got like harnessed my attention and like kind of guided it towards my attention, and I get the outcome of the efforts that I put into to execute on this idea or project, then that's success to me. Like, it's not necessarily the outcome aligns with what I was expecting or hoping for. It's more that I successfully built this and now I'm measuring it and like its impact, and then I'm learning from it. And that cycle of building, measuring, learning, which I think comes from like the lean startup sort of principles, that I think successfully following through, I think that feels like success. And also I feel that success for me at the moment feels like if I get to do a thing like that with people, that's like collaboration. Just even if it doesn't always work out, the learning from collaboration, I'm a people person, so that feels like success.
What advice would you give to a man in his early 20s setting out on a journey of entrepreneurship?
I'm not really like big on advice because it's very autobiographical. And I think, but saying that, there are things that I've learned to do that I would like. I think if anyone's listening to this and is that age or any age, that this is a tool that is in my toolbox that I think is one of the most powerful tools. So spit out. It's basically the informational interview. And I think a lot of us have done similar things to like exploring a new space and then speaking to your friend that's a podcaster or works in that space and saying, I would like to add value in this space. So you literally reach out to people that are in the position of like having the experience that you are pursuing, or like the new career, or have a, sometimes it's a job, but sometimes it's also just like they've had the contribution to the world and the niche that you're about to operate in. So I read about this in the Harvard guide that they give to graduates about like how to get a job, because I was trying to rewrite my CV and I found the Harvard CV. I was like, what else did they tell Harvard students? So I saw this guide and it said about this informational interview. So you reach out to people, you say that I want to add value in this space. I've seen from your career and seen from what you've done in the past that you know this space really well. And I was wondering if I could arrange for like a 30-minute conversation with you, and I'll come to you just to understand from your perspective where you think I could add value and where what you think the opportunities are and the learnings from your journey. So one of four things normally happens. One, they ignore you, which is fine. They didn't know you anyway.
Don't ask, don't get.
Exactly. I think you've got to collect up those no's because it's proof that you're actually trying. And then the other thing that's happened is, the second thing that can happen is that you meet with them, they give you the insider's guide. Saves you so much time. So much time. And you're standing on the shoulders of giants. These are people that are very experienced in the space. And then the third thing that can happen is they give you the insider's guide and they say, do you know what? I like your energy. I like your approach. We've built rapport. I'd love to introduce you to some of the people in my network. So all of a sudden you have the introduction of someone who's in this space that already has relationships and you're getting to benefit from those relationships. And then the fourth thing that can happen, which is actually how I got my job at Shoreditch Arts Club, is you get hired on the spot because they're like, I love your energy. Here's the insider's guide. And here is some people that I know, but actually, do you know, with your skill set, I think we have a need for someone like you. And especially because you get to demonstrate what you're about in front of them out of the framework of like HR and handing in a CV. And I think once you have that tool in your arsenal, there is no space that you can't go into because it's just human. It's not like I need to jump through hoops. Your only credential is the curiosity and the openness and your active listening. And I think that is, if I could give anything to my younger self or give anything to a 20-year-old that was pursuing a path of trying to work out what they wanted to be and self-actualize, I think this is what I would give them, like a real structured way of reaching out into the world and building those connections.
Yes. And your job at Shoreditch Arts Club, what does that entail now? And what's your favorite thing about it?
I love that there's this beautiful space that is filled with art in an area that I grew up in, just on Red Shirt Street. Seeing that whole area of Shoreditch change for good, bad and ugly, I think still being in that space and still being able to have conversations with people and show them around the space. Become a special projects manager was a title that I was playing with that just gives me the opportunity to connect this space with people. And I think that placemaking with all of these different amazing individuals that are building communities online as well as in person, like this amazing production company called Joy Productions, and my friend Saba, who works there as, I think she's like the head producer. She manages their slate essentially. But so she did an event in the Arts Club that was for POC queer filmmakers. And I love that they get to have a space. So that's, I think my role there is just introducing them to these communities that wouldn't know that there's someone in there that is like, got your back. Like, you don't have the budget for this, we'll work it out. Like, and that still feels great.
Yeah, I see so much connective tissue in all of the different things that you've been doing. I see the thread line for sure.
Yeah.
My last question is actually, if I had to watch one film or read one book or look at one piece of art that would help me to understand you better, what would you direct me to?
Such a good question. I think I want to go for like the rare raw materials, not like necessarily the B-side. Yeah, the B-side. I love a B-side, deep cut. So there's a film called Fresh that when I watched it, I felt very, very understood about like ambition. And it's the story of this child that's like in obviously a much worse situation than I am, that I've ever really even experienced. But I just identified with this young person that had to then find a way to navigate in this like turning his life into a chessboard of how does he move the pieces around in order to get the desired outcome for him and the people close to him, and what does he have to sacrifice in order to get there. And I love playing chess, so this was that when I saw that film I was like, this is someone who's using the metaphor of like a chessboard to gamify and restructure the world around them and have an effect on the world around them in a way where they're no longer a piece on someone else's chessboard. They're now like setting the pace with very little power, because he was a child in 80s New York. Samuel Jackson has a feature in the film as well. It's just one of those great sort of like deep cut films that not many people have seen.
Fresh.
When I watch it, Fresh. And when I watch that film, I just feel empowered to like move the pieces around in the way that I see fit, because like this is my life, my chessboard, my opportunity to maximize my contribution to the world and win by whatever definition I say.
I love that. Can't wait to watch it.
Yeah.
Is there anything else in the kind of closing notes on this that you wanted to say that we haven't touched upon around the concept of slowing down, of redefining success and growth, of going against profit at all cost capitalist culture, of any of those kind of broader topics, or what the term slowing down kind of means to you?
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think right now I'm in a space where I'm looking at the skills that I have and the way the world is and where the pain is. I think that's, as an entrepreneur, that's what you're looking for. Like, what pain are you close to, and how can you engineer and experiment with solutions to that pain, and also help other people in that space that are trying that as well. So before you know, and you're like, well, this is my idea, this is what I'm going to do, this is how I'm going to help, you're like, who's already helping, and like helping the helpers. And I think the perspective that you have from slowing down is really valuable. And I think as part of my creative process as like a founder, and I guess an artist one day, is that the beginning of a project, like before you run in a direction, the research part of it, like reveling in that part of how can I just fix a small thing, and how can I contribute in a small way. And I think slowing down, for me, the reminder in my process is that like all of the large things start really small. And if you slow down, you can do the small thing with a level of intention and care that means that the next thing that you do, it's demonstrated in the small thing, in the way that you've put in the effort to build this tiny little version of it, and this little solution, this little patch to a much larger problem. But you're not attacking the whole problem. You're just like, I'm going to build this little thing that solves this little thing for people really well. And this is my version of it. And I think that, for me, is what slowing down means. And I think right now the space that I'm in is something that I wanted to quickly talk about, which is after cooking for yoga retreats and cooking in these different spaces and traveling and meeting all these people that are into wellness, one of the things that resonated with me, because obviously the restaurant version is my idea, is I want to buy land and organize retreats. And that's like the larger picture of how I want to live. But the smaller version of that is I am entering the space of social wellness and the strength of our bonds and connections and the feeling of belonging, which I think contributes so heavily to people's mental health and people's physical health. Like if you're spending time with people and in these spaces that are not so healthy and you're being isolated, then that will lead to deteriorating physical health and mental health. So if you want to patch that, like the focus is on social wellness. So I want to help the people that are like starting running clubs, starting communities, by giving them almost like a playbook and just being supportive with my skill set. So that's the first thing, is I'm building like another directory, but of all of the tools that you need in order to start a community. And that's the first tiny little version of what I want to do in the long run.
Wow, yeah. I mean, I think you're an expert on that already. So I very much look forward to watching what becomes of all of these things and what happens. And thank you so much for giving your time to this experiment of a podcast show. Yeah. I really appreciate that you have shared and that you've said yes when I asked you.
Immediately. Yeah, no, I think it's such a brilliant idea. And I think slowing down is a really powerful angle for you to come at it through. And I'm really rooting for this space that you've built. And I cannot wait to watch this. I spend a lot of time watching podcasts, and this is definitely going to the top of the list.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Come here.
Thank you for tuning in. This episode was hosted and created by me, Tiana Tambridge. It was produced by Whitney Rosenthal. Sound and video recording, mixing, editing, and mastering is by Brazen Studios. Cover art designed by Natalia Ruche. Please subscribe to The Slowdown to be notified of upcoming episodes, tell a friend, and leave a review, because it really helps a new podcast like this get out there into the world. And remember, we're all heading to the same destination, and there is no prize for getting there early, so we might as well slow down.